Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. I am Mark Adamson. I'm Commercial Director here at Lumera UK. You may have already noticed that I'm on a 3-second delay, so my actions are about 3 seconds behind my words. Hope that doesn't put you into too much of a stupor this morning. What I can assure you is that although I've got a 3-second delay, there won't be a delay to dashboards. It's really happening. The first schemes will connect to dashboards before Easter. And from that point onwards, 3,000 more schemes will connect in the next 18 months, and they'll be displaying 100 million or more pensions. So this is a big deal, and there's plenty to do, but it's not too late to learn. And our theme today is tackling pensions dashboards, insight from experts. And we have 4 experts today, plus me. The webinar aims are to help you to get some practical guidance on dashboards, a bit of guidance on preparing member data for consumption by dashboard users. We'll talk about eco insights, so some updates on industry efforts to ensure dashboards can securely and effectively operate within the ecosystem. We'll talk a little bit too about the testing phase of the government dashboard. And we'll seek to give you an understanding of how view data and how it's presented and used may evolve over time. And importantly, it's not just us in the UK and our views on this. We have lessons to be learned from someone who's been there and done it in Europe. So let's meet our panel. I'm sure you'll all know Chris Curry. Chris is here in his role as Principal, Pensions Dashboards Programme. I think personally, it's hard to argue against the view that Chris has one of the most demanding jobs in pensions right now. But that's not something you'll hear from Chris himself. He handles himself always with modesty, diplomacy, and humour. He absorbs that pressure. I don't know how. We have Anders Lundström, our voice from afar. Anders, I think it's fair to say, is Mr. Dashboards in Sweden. For 20 years, he led the organisation that established the Swedish dashboard in 2004, and it was also director of the European Tracking Service. When he speaks, we all listen. And looking at dashboards from a provider point of view, we have Marcus Renouf Allen, who's a senior consultant with LCP. Marcus is also on the PASA working group on dashboards, and his role in dashboards for LCP is to ensure that all LCP's administration clients can connect to the pensions dashboards ecosystem at the right time and with all the necessary data available. No small job. And for transparency, LCP is using Pension Fusion, Lumera's ISP service. And our fourth and final expert is my Lumera colleague, Maurice Titley. I call him a UK dashboards luminary because that's exactly what he is. He's also chair of the PASA dashboards working group, of which Marcus is part. Maurice, you'll have probably heard him speaking at many conferences. One of the things about Maurice that you may not know is that he's shortlisted in the Pensions Personality of the Year category at the Pensions Age Awards, which take place next week. The awards dinner, where he'll learn whether or not he's been successful, is the night before he's giving expert advice to the Parliamentary Work and Pensions Committee. What could possibly go wrong? Well, I'll be asking the panel questions. We've got 3 areas of discussion. You are also able to ask questions throughout. Please use the Q&A facility at the top of your screen. That's the Q&A facility, not the chat facility, to put your questions to the panel, and we'll answer as many of those as we can in the last part of the webinar. So, moving to our first topic, it's the practicalities of implementing and connecting schemes to the pensions dashboards. We're going to ask each of our panel to comment on each of these areas, and we're going to start on this one with Maurice. So my question, Maurice, to you is, what do data providers and ISPs need to do by April 25 to ensure member data is ready?
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everybody. So yes, April 25, it's all about the connection to the pension dashboards ecosystem. Providers and administrators can either connect directly, as some of them are doing, or they can use third parties known as integrated service providers, or ISPs for short. Either way, they've all got the same requirements. So I think we can refer to them as ISPs. So what do ISPs need to do by April 2025? So I think the most talked about thing is that they need to complete their testing with PDP. This is very active at the moment, and I'm sure Chris will update us on that later. This also includes the capability for them to register schemes and set their connection dates within the ecosystem, all critical parts of the process. But I think an ISP is much more than just a connection to the dashboards ecosystem. So, I mean, what else does an ISP need to do before April 2025? And also ahead of that first find request that's going to be coming from the Pension Finder service and the Money Helper dashboard. We don't know exactly when that is, but it's probably not going to be that long away. So in terms of key requirements for ISPs, what do I think? I think the first one is they've got to be up to date in terms of all the changes to the PDP standards that were set out in 2024. So there's quite a bit of work to do to update in that respect. Some of them relate to connection testing with PDP, but some of them don't. Some of them are things that ISPs just have to handle in the way they think best. And of course, some of those standards changes are also data standards, and that filters down way beyond ISPs. It filters down to the administrators and schemes that are actually providing the data. Another thing that ISPs, I think, need to do, and April 25 is a key sort of a milestone for this, is be able to run their schemes in a live mode, whatever that means. So you can actually test the processes that are in place to make sure that that scheme is going to have its data refreshed and synchronized in the way that it needs to be once it is live, because once the connection's made to PDP, then the duties apply. The scheme data needs to be up to date to respond to the requests that are coming in. Another area is the matching engines that are sit behind what ISPs have built. Every ISP's done that the way they've done it. The industry has been left to solve this problem, which is absolutely fair enough, but it does mean that that has to be ready to go, scheme matching rules configured so that these responses can be made to the find requests that come in the very tight target timescales that are required. And then the last one I thought I'd highlight is that the administrators and teams that are going to be interacting with the ISP service need to know how that's going to work for them. And a great example of that, I think, is the well-known 3 and 10 day SLA for providing missing view data. So how is the ISP service going to prompt workflows and notify teams that that is applying and that they need to produce that information in that time frame? So that's from an ISP perspective. Just briefly, I mean, the other side of it is, of course, the actual provision of all the actual scheme member data, and all the preparation has to be done to that. And I'm sure others will talk about that as well. For this, there's an awful lot of PASA guidance that has been produced, and I think it sort of centers on this connection ready guidance that PASA did in 2023 that tries to cover everything that needs to be done to prepare personal details. Well-known sort of topics there, looking at personal details that are going to be used for matching, assessing how accurate, up-to-date they are, but also it's very key to think, to what extent is that going to impact matching? Will the matching actually be able to work around that, or is it really important to get those details up to date in order to make the matching work? Other key area is, of course, preparing pension values, and we'll talk more about that later on in this session, I'm sure. And the big task of putting in place the new processes to calculate some new values on an annual basis, which schemes are having to do. So plenty to do for April 2025, and I would say even more to do ahead of those first find requests coming through, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed, Maurice. So Marcus, quite a lot to do by the sound of it for you and your schemes at LCP. Is April achievable for you, and what have you done to prepare your schemes?
Absolutely, yeah, April is achievable, but we're not going into this with our eyes shut. There's been a lot of work, and there will continue to be a huge amount of work to be done. Pensions dashboards have been a really hot topic for quite some time now, with many schemes gearing for their rollout. So at LCP, all of our schemes are somewhere on their dashboard journey now. The larger schemes with earlier connect by dates have been preparing for quite some time and are now just ironing out those finer details. Meanwhile, the smaller schemes with staging dates, often much closer to that October 26 statutory deadline, are only just getting stuck into their journeys. In terms of preparation at LCP, each scheme's journeys looked a little bit different depending on whether there are sections that are administered by other providers or whether the scheme is on a journey to buyout. As Maurice said, PAS has produced some really helpful guidance to help schemes structure their preparation, and the connection readiness document's a really good place to start building that framework. It covers readiness in 5 main areas, so governance, matching, value data, technology and administration. And it'd be fair to say that at LCP, the value data element's really been taking up its fair share of time and energy as we've been having a real push on the automation front. But this framework offers a really clear roadmap for schemes to get dashboards ready. And when you combine it with the resources from TPR and the additional value guidance and ABC toolkit from PASA, you're in a really good place to prepare for dashboards. Personally, what's really surprised me during the preparation process is the sheer number of individuals and teams involved. There's been involvement from legal teams, comms, developers, calc experts, administrators, and that's just within LCP. And when you layer onto this the interaction and coordination with third parties, especially on data, and if you're using an ISP to connect, with so many moving parts, just really make sure that you allocate ample time in your project plans to develop and test that new software if that's the route you're going down. And just a final point from me, it's essential to view the connection date not as the finishing line, but as the starting point. Once connected, there's going to be an ongoing commitment to maintain those connections, ensure data accuracy, meet reporting requirements, and dashboards are expected to evolve. And from a third-party admin perspective, continuous development will be key as dashboards become integrated with member websites and client platforms. So in essence, the connection date and April really is just the beginning of an ongoing journey.
Thank you, Marcus. A really interesting set of points you made there. And I think the one around taking the opportunity, if we like to call it that, the opportunity that dashboards presents to improve the quality and comprehensiveness of your pension values data is really an important feature. And I know a lot of providers are doing the same thing. An opportunity to be solved, perhaps, is what I would call it, but nevertheless, definitely one worth having a crack at. Chris, can we turn to you next, please? Can you tell us what's happening to ensure that your ecosystem will be in a secure place to run all of this for everybody?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. I would just like to say, actually, you just heard, I think, from Maurice and Marcus, just how much work is happening in the industry at the moment on top of this, and just how complex a program this is. And we are very clear that this is a partnership that we're doing with industry going forward. And so I'll just spend a couple of minutes updating you on where we are on our side of the fence, as it were, and making sure that we're getting everything ready for April, and as Marcus has said, beyond April as well. So hopefully, I think most people will be aware that we've made a lot of progress towards the second half of last year, and we're really carrying that momentum through into 2025. So around summertime last year, we started the connection. We're working with around 20 volunteer participants, some of which are the integrated service providers that Maurice was talking about, some direct providers, some administrators, who are all building a direct connection into the ecosystem. And we think the vast majority of schemes they're going to connect are going to be connecting through one of these voluntary participants going forward. So we're making a lot of progress on the connection journey already. But we're delighted that some of the pathfinders, so those early, those voluntary participants who have volunteered to help us go through the testing regime earliest and first, including the Pension Fusion brand that Lumera are part of, are getting very close towards the end of that journey and that connection journey now. Of the 19, we now have kind of 4 who are through what we think is probably the most critical part of the testing, the integration testing, and that's where the kind of 2 systems, our system and the ISP system, talk to each other. We ensure that they're up to date with the latest versions of the standards that we have, that it can handle find requests, that it can do view requests, that it can return matches, all those kind of things. And so it's great news that not just the pathfinders, but other voluntary participants are now starting to get through that stage and prove that the system is working as we go right the way through and all of those processes. what I think has been really helpful from the Pathfinders and from those who are still going through the process is that we're continually learning and we're continually evolving and taking on board the lessons as we go through to improve the ecosystem and to improve the guidance, our backstage processes, all these things which will ensure that the system is going to operate in a better way going further forwards as a result of all of this. So it's been really, really helpful. I should say that the state pension team at DWP is one of our voluntary participants as well, and they're currently at the integration testing stage. So it's really good that is going to be an important part of dashboards. We know how important it is that people will be able to see their state pension as well as their private pensions in what's happening we're going through. So we are very, very confident, as you said at the top of the webinar, Mark, that there will be live schemes connected well before the end of April, in line with the guidance has been put forward by the DWP, and we're working very closely with the VPs to make sure that that'll happen. We want to make sure that as many of the voluntary participants are connected by that time as possible, so we can then start that onboarding of live schemes in line with the guidance as we're going forward. We're aware that there may be some that are not able to connect all the way through that process before the end of April, but this is where we're working very closely with both the pension regulator and the FCA as well, who are taking a very, I think, pragmatic approach to this. They're focused very much on member outcome, and if the only reason that a connection hasn't happened is because the route to connection is still being tested with us at the Pensions Dashboards programme, then that's not something that the regulators will be necessarily that interested in. So we are, I think, in a very good place in terms of making sure that connections will start on time before the end of April in this year. And we have absolute confidence that all those schemes, those 3,000 or so schemes, will have the opportunity to connect to us well in advance of October 2026, which is the regulatory deadline. So all in all, we think we're in a good place.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. That all sounds very unequivocal, which is perfect. Anders, you must be looking back on this and thinking about where you were 20 years ago. So can you tell us a little bit about how the approach we're taking here differs to that which you took in Sweden?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Well, we had a totally different approach in Sweden. We had more like a step-by-step project. And, the Swedish pension dashboard, Min Pension, it's a public-private partnership. So the state and the industry are in this all together. And the first version was actually built by the state and was handed over to Min Pension in 2004. And participation have never been mandatory for pension providers. And at the beginning in 2004, we only had the state pension and parts of occupational pension. And at a later stage, we also included the private pension, but that took some years. Expanded coverage and more onboarding, more pension providers and also other parties. It took some time and a lot of work, but it took us about 5 years before we reached a good level of coverage and decent data quality. So please don't underestimate that work, especially with data quality.
Thank you very much indeed, Anders. So let's go on to another topic. Let's talk about the testing phase of the government dashboard and what it might look like for you and your users. Chris, it feels like we should start with you on this one, if that's okay. What can we expect from this phase of pensions dashboards implementation?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And it's a very important phase, I think, as we're going through it. And I think our aim, absolutely, I think completely taking on board what we've just heard from Anders about the difficulties and the challenges in doing it, is to make the Money Helper pensions dashboard available at the earliest opportunity, but at the earliest opportunity where it is a good service for consumers. So I think it's worth bearing in mind we have those twin objectives in what we're doing as we're going forward. So the testing phase is really important for generating those really valuable consumer insights to understand what people will be seeing, how they're going to react to it, what their responses are likely to be, and what their follow-up actions are likely to be as part of that. Now, user testing isn't something that's new to the program. In fact, ever since we started back in 2019, we've been running user testing all the way through as we would need to in order to develop both the architecture and the earlier versions and prototypes of the Money Helper dashboard. But what's going to be really different is we're going to now, from ideally in this summer, we're going to have individuals who are looking at their own actual data as part of the dashboard, which is very different from looking at kind of a mock-up and dummy data, which is very good for testing some things. It's very good for testing some of the comprehension potentially, but it's not very good at testing the emotion or what people are likely to do. So when you see your own numbers up there and your own entitlements, actually you probably start to react in a very different way from if you're looking at something with a kind of at a one step removed perspective in doing that. So it's really important that we're going to be able to look at a whole range of different aspects and perspectives. We're going to look at kind of what people's level of understanding is likely to be. We're going to look at things like dropout rates as they go through. We're going to be looking at the actual quality and the accuracy of the data in some different testing that we're likely to be doing as well. So there's a whole range of different aspects of pensions dashboards which are crucial for them being successful that we will be testing as we go through. So the Money Helper pensions dashboard team, I should probably reiterate again, although we are the pensions dashboards program at the Money and Pension Service, the dashboard is being built by a separate team within the Money and Pension Service. They are running the user testing. They've been consulting with the industry, and I think they've had a very large volume of responses to the original consultation, which closed earlier this month. They're currently going through that and are hoping to publish an updated plan of what the user testing will look like, how it's going to build up over time. So starting small, but then building up potentially to tens of thousands of users each month as we go through to make sure that we are testing every aspect that we can of doing that. And we're likely, we think, to be starting that in the summer. And it's not just going to inform the Money Helper dashboard or future iterations of the dashboard, because I think, as Marcus said, as you've heard from Anders, dashboards don't stand still. They're going to be evolving over time. It's also going to help with the iterations that will involve commercial dashboards. So although the government announced in October last year that the Money Helper dashboard will go first, and we think, excuse me, that's going to allow us to bring a dashboard to consumers sooner in doing that. We are still highly committed, and the government is highly committed to there being commercial dashboards, and we're actually working at the moment on constructing that roadmap with the industry to understand what we need to do and what we can learn from the Money Helper dashboard in order to bring commercial dashboards on stream as well. So there's a lot of activity in this place, and it's actually really exciting when we start to see people see their real data on a dashboard for the first time.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Anders, can you help us to understand a little bit more about what it looked like, what the pensions dashboard in Sweden looked like when you first launched it 20 years ago?
Yeah, 20 years is a long time if you look at web development, but the first version was more like a static information, just listing accrued pension entitlements and also providing a holistic pension projections for 4 different ages or retirement ages. And I hope that I will not discourage everyone here, but we actually scrapped the first version after only 18 months. The reasons for that were not so much due to technical problems or progress, but more because that the dashboard itself, it didn't meet the user expectations. We had very high expectations that the dashboard would solve every problem that people had within their pension, but we could just deliver a small part of that. And we could also see that the expectations or requirements from the pension providers, it changed after we started the dashboard. So we had a totally different requirement from the pension provider side. So we totally rebuilt the dashboard, become much more interactive and also handling much more granular data. At the beginning, we had very shallow data and we couldn't do that much with it. So we added even more products to it, and I would say that most of that core code and the architecture that we set up in 2005, it's still there today. So I would say we had quite a steep learning curve just to running a dashboard and to understand the ecosystem of different pensions. We could see that there were things that we have not been told or didn't even know about some of the pension schemes. So it takes some time just to learn the data and to understand how you could handle data too.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anders. Marcus, during this phase, what sort of experience do you think will leave your members feeling satisfied with pensions dashboards?
Ultimately, I think what matters most is that members can log in, find all the pensions they're expecting and really understand what they see. This testing phase is going to be critical for the long-term success of dashboards, and the member feedback will play a key role in shaping that final experience. I see there being 3 key stages of the user journey that we really need to get right. So firstly, will be around that security and access to dashboards. We need a smooth and secure login process that feels familiar and doesn't create unnecessary barriers. So for members, security and privacy are essential. So they need to feel reassured that their data is protected, but without the process being arduous and deterring members away. And as Chris mentioned earlier, dropout rates are going to be one of those things that are looked at quite closely. I think the OneGov login system that will be used to access dashboards will really help in this regard, as it offers that familiarity. And also, I guess in the future, just to add on that point of familiarity, I think the development and role of commercial dashboards will be really important here. And as sort of experience, particularly in Norway, shown, a vast number of requests have come in through apps or portals that individuals find familiar, rather than just the central and government access routes. A key element that I'll be particularly interested in during testing will be around the national insurance number prompts. How many members will provide the national insurance number, given that it's only optional? And if so, what impact does this have on data matching success rates and the user experience? The second part of the journey I see as being once you're logged into dashboards, members will need clear, well-presented data with enough context to ensure that they're understood without feeling overwhelmed. And once inside, members will expect an intuitive experience. So the features that will improve member experience and the testing will focus on will be around navigation. So can members easily find the information that they need? Is there context? Do they understand what the data means? Are the caveats and explanations clear? Personalization. So can members view the data in a format that works for them? I've got a strong preference to view things graphically, but others may prefer text or timelines. And warnings and disclaimers. This is a little bit of a balancing act, but while some data may require contextual warnings, such as pension debits, it must still remain useful and actionable. And lastly, the onward journey. So taking next steps and taking action. A clear onward journey will be so important for member satisfaction. Where do members go if they need more information? Where do they go if they don't understand something? How easy is it to take those next steps? The user journey doesn't end with simply viewing pensions data. Members will only be satisfied and get the most out of dashboards if they know what to do next. And can they continue their journey in a way that suits them, whether that's by phone, email, or through online self-service? The testing phase will need to assess whether clear signposting is in place, and if members feel empowered to take that next step, whether that's contacting their pension provider or seeking financial guidance. So yeah, just a final thought from me. At the heart of all this is confidence, and confidence that the system's secure, the data's accurate, and that members know what to do next. A successful dashboard journey for members is more than just a slick digital tool. It needs to be an experience that feels secure, familiar, and useful. And if members can log in easily, trust what they see, understand their options, and take action with confidence, then I think we'll have created a truly valuable service.
Confidence, yeah, absolutely. Trust is another word, isn't it, Marcus? And that's something that applies throughout pensions, of course. The word trust is a really important one, but certainly important in this context. Maurice, you've been talking to many different providers over the last number of years. Having assessed all of what's going on, seeing what's happening in the coming months and years, what do you think the biggest challenge of this testing phase is?
So, I mean, I think I would build on what, what Marcus has just been saying around the variety of data and some of the challenges with providing data. So, I mean, I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that by the end of November of this year, I think there'll be around 1,000 schemes and providers with all different types of data will already be connected to the ecosystem. So that's close to 100% of all UK pension entitlements will be sitting there, and potentially any one of them might need to be displayed on the dashboard. So that's a challenge for anyone building a dashboard, without a shadow of a doubt. I think underlying this, we've got the Pensions Dashboards Programme data standards, and they set out a structure for the data that's going to be provided. But I think one of the challenges that we have is that those standards don't fully prescribe exactly how schemes should populate that structure. And to be fair, it's been very difficult for them to do that going into this. But I think what that means is that schemes administrators do make their own decisions in some of the areas that Marcus has been flagging there. around complexities in scheme benefits, around different member situations, people over retirement age, people with small pots, whatever it may be. And there's various decisions that can be made in terms of how that data is being sent. Now, how that's then going to look on Money Helper is actually going to be really key to the experience of those savers. And people might see something that doesn't quite reflect what was sent from the scheme. So what do we need to do? I think we need to make sure that the feedback that's gathered from savers, and as Chris was saying, that there's an awful lot of feedback to be gathered around what the savers' individual reaction is to what they see, and lots to be learned from that. I think there is also some more sort of technical feedback in terms of where data was displayed in a way that didn't make sense to them. It might be something that gets captured from the work that the Money Helper team are doing in testing dashboards. It might be something that's captured from pension scheme administrators, because this is real people using dashboards. So they will phone up with queries that they have and speak to their administration team. So I think capturing all that sort of information that comes out of testing is really, really important in this whole area of how we display the pension data on dashboards. Then I think the second main challenge is matching. We've got relatively small volumes going through the testing phase, but I don't think small volumes make matching any easier. This is an automated process that takes place for each and every find request. And the user testing of real live users using dashboards is absolutely a key test of how that is working. And most of the savers who are involved in testing will have a number of pensions with a number of larger providers, but some of them will have older pensions in some of the smaller schemes, and they need to be returned as well. And we can't possibly know which ones they're going to be, but they will be there. So I think schemes and providers, they need to monitor how matching is going to perform in this user testing phase and learn from it, because it's the first proper experience of actually doing something that people have talked about for quite some time. How can they monitor matching? I think for larger schemes should get enough data to sort of look at their overall matching rates during this user testing phase, understand what that looks like relative to the overall usage of dashboards that I'm sure will be publicly available from what Money Helper tell us. Can they compare it to other schemes through sort of benchmarks? Are we achieving what we need to? And this is very similar to the process that the pensions regulator has started to describe in their compliance and enforcement feedback. That's the way they expect to be looking at this data to see if schemes are actually matching in an effective way. A bit harder for the smaller schemes, as there's less chance there's going to be individuals coming through that are actually matching. But even for the smaller schemes, if somebody can't find a pension for some reason and they then query that directly with the scheme, I think we need to try and capture that as an industry and understand where matching hasn't been successful during this testing phase. Final point to make, the other side of matching is the possible match responses where you don't know that it is actually the member of your scheme. Looking at those and the data you get from those during the testing phase, I think, is really interesting, such as what percentage of those responses were actually followed up by the saver. Are savers actually engaging in this process to actually contact the scheme to follow it up? And then of those that did follow it up, what percentage of those ended up being false alarms? Do the criteria for those possible matches need to be tightened because they're actually overreaching? They're inviting too many people who aren't scheme members to come along and have those conversations. And there will be a lot of traffic from possible matches, even with relatively low volumes going through the testing phase. 20,000 tests will create an awful lot of potential possible match responses. So, Mark, there are lots of challenges in this testing phase and lots of feedback to be gathered.
Thank you very much, Maurice. That moves us on to our third and final topic today, which is enhancing the provision and display of view data. Anders, I'd like to start with you and ask you, in Sweden, how do you successfully display imperfect benefits, and how do you learn from those initial user experiences?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer in short, but we did a lot of user testing, and as Chris mentioned before, that you are using real data for users today. That's one beginning. You need to find all the different data that you will not catch in user testing or in issue testing. We had a lot of bad experience when we went live. We had for state employees, about 60% of their occupational pension information or data were corrupt, and we couldn't use that data for showing or listing it in the dashboard. So we tried to prepare for data quality, setting up different functionalities to present poor data. And we did present parts of it, but we made them to contact or had a set of different call to action, how to understand or get better information on it. So we improved that after the start, but it was quite a bad experience in the beginning, of course. And we also added a lot of different statistics and worked very closely with the pension providers to improve the different data quality. And we also had, it's more like the best case that we did was the presenting the dashboard data within the pension provider website. So you could compare the information that you get on the website for the pension provider, and you could also match it to the dashboard information. It was very clear that the data quality was very poor from a few pension providers, so it was a very important task for them to fulfill. But it took some time, and we could also see that when we got more granular data, we could also see that the more granular data, you could spot the cracks within the information much easier. So in the beginning, we didn't have that. It was very shallow data, so it wasn't that clear to everybody that it was really poor data quality. But when you evolve the dashboard and you get more and more information, you can see how bad the quality is. Transparency hurts a lot there. But of course, you need to have a high attention to the user support, and we follow the questions. In the beginning, we followed that on a daily basis and try to get some fixes to improve that information. And we could also see that in the long term, you really need to work with better and more strict information standards to improve overall quality. And of course, you have to look at the different wordings of the different pension statements from the different pension providers and compare that to what you will show on the dashboard too. That was one of the problems too that we had in the beginning. We had different vocabulary with the different pension providers and also state, and we had a different presentation on the dashboard. That takes some time to get more of an overall standard for how you communicate with the users too.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anders. Morris, can I ask you, please, to briefly give us your view on how we can apply Sweden's use case to help our ecosystem here in the UK?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely key question. And Anders has set out all the sort of the key elements we need to take heed of. But of course, the approach in Sweden followed a very different route in terms of onboarding providers, sort of step by step, if you like. I think at its core, I think the approach that Anders has described to me, it's kind of saying, okay, there's two things here. One is understanding the different types of data that are being provided by schemes and providers, and then refining the way that dashboards, and the dashboard to start with is going to present this data to users, but also refining the way that those providers send that data and of course the quality of that data. And I think to achieve the same thing in the UK, the secret is, and I think this is said a lot, but I think I'm sure we'd all agree, it's to have a very collaborative process for how this refinement is going to be carried out during this user testing phase for the Money Helper dashboard. And just sort of drilling into that, I think in the UK context, what does that mean? I think it means starting the process with as much consistency of data provision as possible. So we've got 1,000 schemes and providers ish probably there when the first sort of fine requests are coming through. So how do we do that? We've got PASA's guidance that has helped in terms of supplementing the PDP standards to try and get as much consistency as possible, as Marcus was referring to. Third-party administrators, a lot of them will have house views in terms of how they answer these questions that are left a little bit undefined in the data standards. So those house views are also a really important way that consistency is created across the various schemes that are providing data. And then I think the Money Helper team capturing their feedback on data display, feeding that back to data providers and ISPs is absolutely key, refining the guidance, refining the house views. I think also there's a really key point that I think that the PDP data standards themselves hopefully will evolve. I think everyone's expecting them to, but some of these refinements can be made to the data standards, allowing some of this to be a bit more prescriptive and a bit more sort of set out. And I think a lot of these areas, I mean, again, going back to what Marcus was saying around some of the flags that are used in the system around pensions, perhaps if they're unavailable, if there's warnings, it's some of these areas where we're probably going to have the most issues with consistency of data. But actually, they're also the areas where it's relatively straightforward to change the way that data is being provided. It still takes time because there's thousands of schemes providing the data. A lot of schemes need to change, but a lot of that change might be able to be handled relatively centrally and will be hugely beneficial to the saver experience, where we've identified areas where it's just not coming through consistently. So yeah, in conclusion, I would say, it's effective collaboration that's really required between government, PDP, MAPs, administrators, industry bodies, ISPs, everybody. Then I think we've got a good chance of applying that experience from countries such as Sweden to guide us through.
Thank you, Maurice. We've got some really good questions coming in, some important ones to answer. So Marcus and Chris, I'm going to ask you to be brief, if you could, please, in your response on this last one, so we can move into the questions. Marcus, we heard Maurice there talking about house views, and we heard about how initial testing will be by people who've kind of having their hands held through this process, moderated members of the public, followed by some unmoderated use by invited users. So your house views on view data, how do you think they might develop? How do you think you might test them during this phase?
So yeah, as we know, UK pensions are notoriously complex, and yeah, from my perspective, which is working mainly in a DB world, there are going to be a number of scenarios that we need to cover for and cater for with these house views. I think possibly the biggest house view to settle on for value data is how this data is going to be generated. So will you calculate values upfront and store them, or calculate values on demand? At LCP, we're going to be using stored values that have previously been calculated, as most of the view data that we'll be providing to dashboards will have previously been shared with the member. And again, it comes back to that point of sort of familiarity and consistency. Also, by having stored values, it gives us certainty around our calculation coverage and the number of members that we can provide values for. And also by storing the data at a specific illustration date, for members with AVCs that might be administered elsewhere, we have the benefit of being able to agree in advance with AVC providers that illustration date. As I touched on earlier, there are lots of scenarios where house views may be needed, particularly for accounting for those complex cases, such as your scheme pays debits, pension sharing orders and splits, NRAs. And while I appreciate it is the most complex option, and others may not have the resource to do this upfront, LCP are doing their best to provide figures that accurately reflect the reduction from a debit, as we think these figures will be most beneficial and meaningful for savers. Similarly, where members have got step-ups in pension, in most cases we'll be returning two figures to the dashboard, one amount that will come into payment at NRA and another coming into payment when the pension steps up. During the testing, it's going to be really important that there is that coverage and high volume of cases that cover a wide range of scenarios, to make sure that we can sort of draw out those key insights from house views and they are being tested and evaluated, particularly around those complex edge cases that I've mentioned. And as a part of the evaluation process, members will be able to check the figures that they're seeing back through dashboards to those they might have received on a recent statement, or through a member website. So that will be a real true test of the values, whether they're appropriate, what's being returned. I think the number of queries that are generated from members when no value data was returned will also be an acid test of house views. And just think, if you can't provide values for 10% of your 5,000 members, post go live, these members are prompted to use dashboards. What sort of impact will that have on your admin teams and BAU? Be interesting to see whether perhaps analytics could be used to look at where users are continuing their journeys through to, where they're clicking on, specifically within sort of maybe dashboard FAQs. Are there particular areas that members don't fully understand, and there's some additional sort of context or clarity needed? And then just, last final point from me, as a TPA, it's vital that we monitor and act on the member queries that we receive, as again, that will highlight those areas of ambiguity and where more member education is required. So those member feedback and member questions will certainly steer the evolution of our house views.
Thank you, Marcus. And finally, Chris, what will be put in place to ensure the improvement of view data?
Well, So firstly, actually, the previous answers have all covered an awful lot of really good ground, I think, and highlight the challenges that are involved. I mean, clearly, pensions dashboards will only be good as the data that goes through them. We've learned that from overseas experience as well. We know that from all the consumer research that we've done up until this point. And dashboards will not be launched until there is a good enough coverage, so people will find the pensions that they expect to see, that they operate in a safe and secure environment. So that trust and confidence is really important that we were talking about, and that there's a really positive consumer experience as part of that. And all of those things are things we'll be looking at very closely as we go through the user testing in good time, hopefully. The other aspect I think is worth bringing out here is that as well as being transformational for individuals and consumers using pensions dashboards, the program has been quite transformational for the industry in terms of the way that it views, the way that it uses, the way that it accesses, the way that it looks at its data. There has been an awful lot of work which has been happening already. There will be an awful lot of work that still needs to happen. I think that will be brought into a very clear focus as we go through the user testing and seeing what comes out as part of that, with a lot of the things that Maurice was saying. But I think it's really important that we don't kind of take away from the efforts that have already been made by the industry and the continuing effort. Again, going back to something Marcus said, this is just the start. You will need to be on top of your data right the way through from now on continually in order to make sure that it's always providing good data to pensions dashboards. And so that is, I think, a really big shift for the industry going forward, and something which I think is going to be really helpful. And apologies, I think I've stopped moving, so the lights have gone off. So I might just need, while you ask the first question, I'll just go and see if I can turn the lights back on.
Actually, the first question was going to come to you, Chris, as it happens. So, panel, thank you very much for all your thoughts on those topics. So some really good questions. We're going to start with one which got a lot of attention, I think, through the chat, through the Q&A. So, Chris, what plans are there around the communication of dashboards to the public, given testing's happening this summer and likely heightened public awareness of the programme? I guess we don't want it just to be the Sunday supplements, do we, who tell the public about dashboards?
Yeah, that's right. I think what's really important to bear in mind here is the timing. So I think you're right. We will start testing this summer, but it's going to be relatively low level until we get towards the back end of the year. And even then, as we've already alluded to, it's going to be through invitation. It's not general access. What we don't want to do is to heighten demand for something which actually at that point in time doesn't exist. So it's really important that we get the communications right, that we do. I think it will be quite a big exercise. It will be something which is potentially government-led, but working in conjunction and collaboration with the industry. I think there will be a lot of appetite in the industry to get their members to use pensions dashboards as well. There's always the potential kind of Martin Lewis moment as well, where if we appear on his show, we know that there will be a big spike in the numbers of people starting to look for pensions dashboards. We don't want to do that until we're in a position where we know that there's a safe, secure system in place that is giving people good information and a good consumer experience. So we'll be tying that communications in, I think, closer to the launch of the Money Helper dashboard and building up to that rather than doing it around the testing this summer.
Thank you very much, Chris. Marcus, one for you, I think. Others may wish to contribute. The question reads, we want to make it clear to our employees and members what this is all about and what the dashboard will show. How should the employer help?
So, yeah, again, from my perspective, and thinking of this with the clients that we work with, I think having that joined up approach with the trustees to pull together a sort of high level communication strategy is going to be really important. And then through that, perhaps using member newsletters as a starting point to sort of get that initial high level information out to the entire membership, obviously targeting it at your active and deferred population, but you've also got the opportunity then of explaining to your pensioners and dependents why they won't see figures through pension dashboards. And then, perhaps, obviously, given that dashboards are being targeted at active and deferred members, there's the opportunity of maybe holding a sort of roadshow or sort of an in-person forum, perhaps, to really have a sort of deeper dive with those active employees and explaining exactly what it means for them and what they can expect to see.
Thank you very much.
And Mark,
sorry, Maurice, carry on.
No, absolutely fine. I completely agree with what Marcus has said. I mean, one other thing I'd add, it'd be interesting when the dashboards are available, the extent to which schemes decide that they'll proactively sort of advise members if there is something they need to understand about the benefit they'll see on the dashboard, as opposed to something they might be more familiar to seeing, and maybe sort of just making that point to their members that the dashboard is about something quite different in a way. It's about seeing the whole pension. It's got the state pension. It's got everything there together. If they've got questions about their individual scheme, they should be obviously going back to the scheme administrators as they would normally do.
Yep, very good. Thank you, Maurice. Anders, can we talk about the matching data items used in Swindon?
Yeah,
used in Sweden, and have they changed over the years?
It has changed a little bit, but if you look at compared to UK, we had a much better position. We have a big infrastructure. We had a social security number that is used by all the different pension providers, and we had, if you look at the individual information, we could do the matching much easier. And we also started with the electronic ID in 2004. It wasn't that big in the beginning, but it improved a lot. And today I think that you need to have a banking ID or electronic ID, or else it doesn't exist in this country. So we had a much easier journey there, but we had a lot of work with just improving the data quality and onboarding more pension providers. But compared to your journey, it's much easier.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chris, another one for you, if I may. The question reads, I recently read that due to this initiative now running over budget, there were likely to be further delays, and there was still a chance it would not happen at all. Is there any truth in this?
The short answer is no. There isn't any truth in that. As I mentioned earlier, we're still going full steam ahead. We're still looking for those connections to commence before the end of April this year. We've still got the regulatory date for all the schemes to connect by, which is a legal framework and a legal deadline. We're hoping that the standards that will also be part of the statutory framework, once they're signed by the Secretary of State for work and pensions, will be signed very soon. So we're currently going through that process as well. So we're actually building up the legal framework to enshrine it. Things are definitely going to happen. We're working very hard on the Money Helper dashboard. As I said, we've already started the work stream to get commercial dashboards in place as well. If anything, I think the momentum is picking up around the programme. There might be some wishful thinking in some parts of the industry that they might not have to worry about it, but the very strong message from me and coming from the government is that dashboards are going to happen, and actually the process is starting very, very imminently.
Thank you. Hopefully that quashes those rumours, Chris, but we'll see. They're hard to quash, aren't they, rumours? That's the trouble. Just to follow up to something you said, Marcus, you noted the relationship between dashboards and member websites. Could you just expand a little bit on your thinking there?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say in this sort of current iteration of dashboards, it's going to be sort of primary aims of really trying to sort of reconnect individuals and savers with those lost pots, and starting to kind of create that holistic view and enable savers to see everything in one place. I think from sort of LCP's perspective, where clients and schemes have got that member website and perhaps sort of online modelers, and they want to continue their journey, we'll be making sure that figures that we see through dashboards are initially sort of mirrored in what's seen through a member website. But then the member website and the modeler functionality will enable individuals to sort of take that journey forward and obtain quotes at specific dates, and how sort of taking cash might impact it. So it's all sort of it's tying that link between the sort of figure that's seen on dashboard, making sure it's seen on the member website, and then enabling the user to sort of take forward that journey in a way that they would like.
Thank you very much, Marcus. We haven't got time for all the questions, but we're going to squeeze one more in. One for you again, Anders. What's your top tip, Anders, for building the trusting, collaborative relationships between government officials and industry practitioners, which are so essential for delivering dashboards to consumers?
Yeah, that's a question of trust there too, I think. But you need to put the key top managements in one room, and you have to discuss an honest discussion. What do we want with pensions? And you have to understand that the state has a different goal with the information from the dashboard or implementing a dashboard, and the industry has another interest in it. So you need to be very honest about it, and you can't have any hidden agendas. It takes a lot of time, but you need to get that people within the same room and start discussing these questions and be honest with each other. And you need to have some kind of intermediary there, but I suppose that Chris, sorry about that, Chris, but you have a very important task there. You need to discuss it, be very open. And we even had totally different agendas for the private sector and for the state sector. And we put all the different wish lists together with each other and had an open discussion, what can we agree on? And I would say that that's a big part with having a public-private partnership like Min Pension. We had a lot of discussions about it, but at the end, you need some kind of commercial dashboards when you reach some certain level where you can't agree on anything more. So I don't have any silver bullet for it, but you need to start discuss it, and you need to be very open with the different agendas that you have. And in our case, we had a good place for the discussion, and that was in the board of Min Pension. We had both 50% state and 50% private, and we started the discussion there. But we also had discussions in both the state part for the minister and also for the private part with the equivalent to ABI in their board. And we had different sessions where an open and discussing all these areas. It's not an easy thing to do, but you need to start somewhere.
Thank you, Anders. We have less than 2 minutes, but one very quick final question for Chris. Not knowing the likely scale of requests makes it difficult for schemes to establish an optimal operating model. When does PDP expect to inform the industry of the likely volume of requests?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and it's something we're very aware of in the program as a whole. The two key parts, I think, one is we're going to get a lot of that information during the user testing. I think one of the things we want to do is to look at what people understand, what they say they were going to do. We know that doesn't always translate into action, but if people say, well, actually, I'd like to find out more about this number, and actually what they actually do, as Morris said, they're actually going to be looking at their data. They might contact their administrators as part of that, and so we can look at what the responses are as we go through that. What's really important is, I think, the government's commitment to make sure that there is a minimum of 6 months notice before the launch of a dashboard to the industry. So there is going to be time. It might take more than 6 months, so I wouldn't wait until we say it's coming to definitely start putting some of these things in place. But you will get notice of a dashboard being launched in order to make sure that you get these things in place. Because let's be honest, again, going back to some of the answers we've already had today, if the industry is not able to prepare to meet the demand that's going to come from people using dashboards, then dashboards will not be a success. So we need to make sure that that user journey from end to end, including that which is done on the dashboard and that which is done in the private sector, works for consumers. And so we need to make sure that the industry can prepare as best it can.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much, panel. Thank you for everybody who joined us today. We hope you found it an enjoyable experience and a helpful experience. But do remember, if anything you've heard today has caused you anxiety, you know where we are. Thank you very much, everybody. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.